If it walks like a duck, if it quacks like a duck, and it looks like a duck, then by God, it's a duck. This is Masters Report. I'm John Masters, and you're not. All right, guys, I have to bring this up. I've been saying this since the dancing nurses. This is what really turned me on to this whole COVID thing, was the videos of all these nurses dancing that were so overwhelmed and, according to the news. But I've been saying it since that day. And probably, give me a couple of weeks after it, but right about then. And not to be one to, say I told you so, but, let's be honest about this. I told you so. I have been saying that due to the disaster, due to all of the economic hardship and the damage to the American public and the world itself, which hasn't even been calculated yet. We'll calculate that later. But we are going to have to do something about this. We are going to have to mandate it. We are even going to have to fire people that do not get vaccinations. Because let's be quite honest, people. That's what they really want. And they also want the trace tracking to prove it. They also want to put you in jail or get you fired from your job, which I'm going to go into a little bit more, if you don't have a vaccine. If you do not have your vaccine, kind of like your dog. If you want to travel with your dog, you got this little book, a little booklet. It's stamped and signed by the veterinarian that your dog has all of its shots. Well, you're going to have one too. Guys, if you have not subscribed, make sure to subscribe because I put out stuff other people just don't. We're also member supported. Thank you, members. Please continue your support. You are making a difference on this channel. Starts at 99 cents a month, guys. Check it out. Now, this isn't getting a lot of attention yet, but remember, everything starts with a low roar. And this just came out in the New England Journal of Medicine. And I want you to notice something. Okay, the reason that it's not big right now is because Donald Trump caught the cold and he may die, according to everyone, because he has a cold or he has COVID 19 and the mortality rate is less than 1%. Of course, he is in a higher risk group, but anybody at his age catching the cold is in a higher risk group. But that's right, we have to pay attention to this because politically, this is a good thing for him. And I'll explain that in another video. But I want you to read this first paragraph because, I mean, it's really ominous, all right? And more so than what it appears on its face value because of the infectiousness and dangerousness of the virus. Remember, I've been saying that. I'm not going to do I told you so, I promise, okay? Just that one time. Well, twice now. Relative substantive penalties could be justified, including employment suspension. Now, that is important right there, guys. I have been bringing this up. Now, what sector of our business has been hurt the most by the lockdown? And it's almost as if it's planned, is small businesses, restaurants, etc. In other words, areas of employment that is not corporate. Corporations do not buy up property. They do not buy up businesses when it's at its highest value. What they will do, remember, these guys are ruthless, okay? They're ruthless. They will reduce the value of that business or that sector and then scoop everything up for pennies on the dollar. And then all of a sudden, mysteriously speaking, everything's fine again. And the property value just skyrockets. That's how they do it. Now, if we have the corporations owning all of these smaller businesses, which now become big businesses or big corporations, in other words, your local Mexican restaurant, well, it'll still be there. It'll just be called Chili's now. Or it could be Chipotle. Who knows? It'll be one of them. It'll be a mega corporation. So now what they're going to do is if the government cannot make you do something because of that pesky constitution, what they're going to do is create a regulation forcing businesses to do their dirty work. As a matter of fact, it's something that the businesses wanted in the first place because they got to buy up all those small businesses and you got no place else to go but a big corporate McDonald's. It's going to be, honey, let's go out for a fancy evening, okay? Let's go to the Uptown McDonald's. Yeah. That's going to be your romantic night out. But anyways, if you do not have your vaccination, you will not be able to get a job. It's coming, and I'm telling you. So, including employment suspension or stay at home orders for persons designated high priority groups. Now, this right there, and let me highlight that, okay? Including suspension or stay at home and designated high priority groups. All right, what is it that we have been hearing, okay? If you want to cut out all the bullshit, all of the propaganda, what you got to do is break it down into its simplest terms. Because everything from that simplest terms is either justification or bullshit, okay? If you break it down to its simplest term, it tells you what is going on. Now, what have we heard over and over and over again besides you got to wear a mask, da 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 da? What have we heard? We've been drilled with the concept of essential workers. Essential. In other words, they're indispensable. So now we have two groups of Americans, or we have two groups of people within this whole world. We have the essential worker and we have non essential workers. And what happens when we get to a point when the government just doesn't have a whole lot of extra money to spend on health care, etc.? Well, it's going to be because of the non-essential workers, isn't it? These freeloaders, which by the way, they took their jobs and everything, but anyway, these freeloaders that are not essential to the economy, essential to mankind, well, they need to go, and they'll find a place for them. I'm not going to talk about eugenics, and I'm not going to, but they're going to find a place for them. Nazi Germany found a place. Stalin found a place. Every totalitarian government that has ever existed has found a place for non-essential workers. In fact, that's one of the first things that they do is to begin to divide the country between essential and non-essential. And then, of course, you convince all of the essential workers how the non-essential workers are taking money for food out of your mouth. Or anyways, so this high priority groups, again, stressing that whole essential, non-essential worker who refused vaccinations, says the NEJM paper. It also states that authoritarian, here we go, it's okay to be authoritarian. Authoritarian translated is totalitarian, okay? Authoritarian medical personnel should bypass due process. Bypass due process? Is this America? Are you freaking kidding me? Personnel should bypass due process so that no one can challenge their orders in a court of law. Well, wait a minute. This is why we have a court of law. Hey, all of you people that want a socialist country, is this really what you want? No longer have a due process, just being able to be thrown in jail because a doctor, somebody who's authoritarian, somebody who's authoritative, says that you need to be in jail. If a cop says, right now we're already being conditioned with red flag laws. A cop says, hey, I don't trust this guy, I think he's dangerous. You can go to a judge and he can have your gun taken away from you without due process. Later on, you've got to go back, just like asset forfeiture. You are guilty until proven innocent. You then have to go in front of that court and prove that you are responsible enough to be able to have a weapon. Anyways, that no one can challenge the orders of in a court of law. In other words, you're stuck. Stating neither fines nor criminal penalties should be used. However, criminal penalties invite legal challenges on procedural due process grounds and may stoke distrust. You're kidding me. Yes. Actually, I think if you start putting people in jail, period, without due process, it may stoke distrust. But here's the thing, okay? Here's what they're hoping. Okay, if we're not going through the procedural due process, okay, then it can be done in the dead of night now, can't it? So, in other words, people won't know about it. Look, guys, about 30 years ago, I talked to a couple of older people, and they were from Germany, okay? And, I got to know them, fairly well. I was doing work for them. And I asked them, The question for you is how is it that the people of Germany allowed for the Jewish to be taken out of their homes, etc.? Well, what he stated was this: most of us didn't know. It was done under the table in the dead of night, quietly. If you were to see the police go into, the Gestapo go into a building and take out a family, you would be told that they are criminals, and that's all you would hear. It wouldn't be in the paper or anything because the papers were owned by the government. Kind of like in America, how our news organizations are owned by six families and decide what's going to be on the news. And of course, what's on the news is going to fit their agenda. So, anyways, we're going to be able to do this without due process, without getting in front of a judge, and nobody knows about it. Goes on to explain that vaccine mandates should not be promoted as mandates. Instead, those who refuse vaccine should be harshly punished as a way to force the mandate without ever declaring it. You see, we have this little pesky problem called the Constitution. But as long as, we maintain our, shall we say, lockdown, state of emergencies, state mandates should not be structured as compulsory vaccination, absolute requirements. Instead, non-compliance should incur a penalty. So, in other words, you're not in trouble, but you are. And then, incredibly, the same paper goes on to claim that health authorities must build public trust through a transparent and inclusive process. This is why we have courts and due process. Anyways, even though the same paper openly claimed the public should be misled and coerced into vaccine mandates. To its credit, the paper does argue that vaccine manufacturers should not be involved in crafting public policy. What are you freaking? What do you think you're doing right now? You guys got to remember, on every board, in every media in the United States, within every court, within every political structure, they have lobbyists. They have members on the boards of these media organizations, but they're not going to have any say so, okay? They're not crafting anything. Public policy or pushing mandates. No, they're not doing it at all. They're already doing it. Okay, since no one trusts the vaccine companies anymore, amazingly how quick that happened. Guys, I mean, that is at least on the bright side. People's eyes are being open here. Let me just do a couple of more things and then I want to say something in closing, which is really important, okay? So the bottom line here is as follows. The health authoritarians are pushing for mandatory vaccines, but they won't call them mandates. Instead, they will punish you for refusing to go along with their mandates, making your life miserable, such as you cannot get a job, you'll be fired, you cannot go into, let's say, a restaurant without your little booklet, okay? It a problem. I'm pretty sure they're going to push it as far as a mobile app because you have to have this mobile app because the mobile app will do contact tracing. It'll also validate through a government organization who has no access to this information, even though it's going to the government organization, to verify that you have your vaccines and you're being contact traced. So you won't be able to go into a restaurant. You won't be able to get a job. You won't be able to buy groceries. You won't be able to pretty much, I'll bet you they'll even break it down to you can't buy gas. This is similar to what they're doing in China right now with social scoring. They're bringing in a social scoring system. And they're using COVID as the reason. Now, look, before you guys go, John, this isn't no big deal. This is really important. This does need to be done. And these are for the believers in COVID 19. It's to save the world, it's to save lives. I know people who have died of it, etc. And hey, that's fine. But I want to remind you of one thing. The war on drugs started about the children. It was only to protect the children, and it was just a few little steps. Well, it didn't take long for it to go to asset forfeiture, people breaking into homes. In other words, police breaking into homes, no knock warrants, people being shot, people being terrorized as if they're terrorists. Stop and frisk. I go on more. Instead, they will punish you for refusing to go along with the mandate. They are avoiding any mandates that could be challenged in a court of law in order to bypass due process. They then claim this is how the vaccine industry can build trust with the public by pretending to be engaged in transparency.